The wind cut across my face as my sister pushed my wheelchair toward the edge of the hill. From a distance, we probably looked ordinary, just two sisters spending a quiet afternoon at the park. She walked behind me, chatting about the weather, about work, about nothing that mattered. If anyone had glanced our way, they would have seen a caring younger sister helping her disabled sibling enjoy some fresh air. But my body knew something was wrong long before my mind caught up. Her grip on the handles was too tight. She suddenly stopped. The trees around us whispered in the cold breeze, and for a moment, everything went silent except my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then she leaned down close to me, so close I could feel her breath against my skin, and she whispered 5 words that froze my blood. Everything is mine now. Before I could turn around, before I could even ask what she meant, she shoved. Hard. The wheelchair lurched forward, and the world tilted violently beneath me. I grabbed for the wheels, trying to slow myself down, trying to engage the brakes. Nothing. They didn't respond. The hill dropped sharply toward a rocky ravine below, and suddenly I was flying downhill, helpless, my scream tearing out of my chest as gravity took over. My heart slammed against my ribs while the ground rushed closer. I realized in that horrifying second that this wasn't an accident. She had sabotaged my wheelchair. My own sister had planned this. I saw her standing at the top of the hill, watching me fall. She didn't run after me. She didn't scream for help. She just stood there, her lips curled into something that looked disturbingly close to satisfaction. That was when I understood. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to erase me. But what Melissa didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone had already seen her tampering with my brakes. Someone had been watching from behind the trees. And someone was seconds away from calling 911. She also didn't know that I had been quietly recording everything for days, or that her desperate financial secrets were about to collide with a hidden inheritance, a buried workplace crime, and a family betrayal that went far deeper than I ever imagined. This wasn't just a story about a sister who tried to kill me. It's about how I uncovered a chain of lies that stretched back 5 years, how my own father was involved, and how I went from being the invisible daughter in a wheelchair to the woman who finally forced her entire family to face justice. So please stay with me. Because what happened after that push down the hill changed my life forever. My name is Amber Richardson. I'm 35 years old, and until a few years ago, I was a quality control supervisor at a manufacturing plant in Ohio. I was the kind of person who liked order, precision, and quiet routines. I believed hard work paid off. I believed family meant safety. I believed that if you treated people with kindness, they would do the same in return. I was wrong about almost everything. Today, I'm telling you the story of how my own sister tried to murder me, how I uncovered a betrayal that reached far deeper than I ever imagined, and how losing everything forced me to finally find myself. But to understand how I ended up flying downhill in a broken wheelchair while my sister watched from above, you need to know what my life looked like before that moment. It started 5 years ago. A machine malfunction at work crushed my spine and changed my life forever. One second, I was standing at my station, checking measurements like I had done 1,000 times before. The next, I was waking up in a hospital bed, unable to feel my legs. Doctors told me I might never walk again. Rehabilitation was brutal. Pain became my new normal. Independence vanished overnight. I went from being a woman with her own apartment, her own career, her own plans, to someone who needed help just to get dressed. Still, I fought. I learned how to use a wheelchair. I returned to work in a different role. I rebuilt what I could, and for a while, I told myself that surviving was enough. Then, earlier this year, complications from the original injury forced me to undergo corrective spinal surgery. Recovery meant 6 weeks in a wheelchair, and it meant something even harder. Moving back into my parents' house, I told myself it was temporary, just until I healed. But the moment I rolled through that front door, I knew I wasn't truly welcome. My mother barely looked up from her magazine. My father muttered something about the guest room being ready and disappeared into his study. And my younger sister Melissa stood in the hallway with her arms crossed and a familiar smirk on her face. "Well," she said, "5 years later and you're still playing the victim card." I didn't respond. I had learned long ago that arguing with Melissa never led anywhere good. In our family, Melissa was the golden child, the successful one, the charming one, the one who could do no wrong. And I was inconvenient. That first night back confirmed everything I already felt. At dinner, I noticed a large framed photo on the wall, my parents smiling proudly beside Melissa at her college graduation. I scanned the room for any sign of my own accomplishments, my degree, my promotions, even a simple snapshot from when I bought my first apartment. There was nothing. The only person who had ever celebrated me was my grandmother, Eleanor. She had passed away 2 years earlier. After dinner, I casually mentioned that I was thinking about revisiting my workplace accident. I told them maybe new evidence existed. Maybe I deserved answers. My father stood up so suddenly his chair scraped loudly across the floor. He left the table without saying a word. "Your father doesn't like talking about unpleasant things," my mother explained, as if that made sense. Later that night, I saw him in the garage through a cracked window, speaking urgently into his phone. "She can't start asking questions now," he whispered. "I handled it years ago." Something cold settled deep in my stomach. The next morning, my wheelchair brakes made a strange grinding sound. When I mentioned it to Melissa, she rolled her eyes. "You're probably just using it wrong." That evening, our elderly neighbor, Mr. Harris, knocked softly on my window. His face was pale in the moonlight. "I saw someone near your wheelchair in the garage," he whispered. "Please be careful." Before I could ask more, he walked away. Over the next few days, Melissa grew increasingly hostile. I overheard her on frantic phone calls. I caught her rummaging through Grandma Eleanor's belongings in the attic. "You always got everything," she snapped when I confronted her. "Even when she was dying, she still favored you." That was when I found it. A sealed envelope in my grandmother's handwriting. "For Amber. Open on your 35th birthday." Inside was a living trust. Grandma had left the family house to me, but it would only activate on my 35th birthday, 3 weeks away, and suddenly, everything made sense. Melissa wasn't just angry, she was desperate, which brings me to that afternoon in the park. The wind cut across my face as Melissa pushed my wheelchair toward the edge of the hill. From far away, we must have looked normal, two sisters enjoying fresh air. But her grip on the handles was too tight. She stopped behind me. Then she leaned down so close I could feel her breath on my skin. "Everything is mine now." Before I could react, she shoved. The wheelchair lurched forward. I grabbed for the wheels, tried to brake, tried to scream. Nothing worked. The ravine rushed toward me. And in that terrifying moment, I understood the truth. My sister wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to erase me. But Melissa didn't know that someone had already seen her tampering with my brakes. She didn't know I had been quietly recording everything. And she had no idea that this single push was about to unravel 5 years of lies, expose my father's darkest secret, and change all our lives forever. So please, stay with me. Because what happened next wasn't just about survival. It was about justice. I didn't sleep much after finding my grandmother's trust. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the house settling. Every shadow felt heavier. Every sound felt loaded with meaning. My mind replayed Melissa's recent behavior over and over, fitting her words and actions into a picture I didn't want to see. She wasn't just cruel, she was calculating. Growing up, Melissa had always been louder than me, more confident, more demanding of attention. She knew how to charm teachers, neighbors, even strangers in grocery store lines. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need praise to do what was right. Somewhere along the way, that difference turned into a permanent imbalance. My parents leaned toward Melissa without realizing it. They excused her mistakes. They softened her consequences. When she snapped, they called it stress. When she crossed lines, they called it personality. And when I struggled, they called it sensitivity. That night, lying in the dark, I thought about how many times I had swallowed my feelings just to keep the peace. How often I had told myself that family dynamics were complicated, that nobody was perfect, that love didn't always look fair, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. The next morning, I rolled into the kitchen for breakfast and found Melissa already there, scrolling on her phone with frantic energy. Her knee bounced under the table. She barely acknowledged me, muttering a quick hello before stepping outside to take another call. I heard her through the open window. "I told you I need the money before the end of the month," she hissed. "I don't care how, I just need it." Her voice cracked with panic. When she came back inside, she plastered on a smile and poured herself coffee like nothing had happened. I watched her hands as she lifted the mug. They were trembling. Later that afternoon, I caught her in the attic again, going through boxes that still smelled faintly of my grandmother's lavender sachets. She froze when she saw me. "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. She snapped back instantly. "Looking for paperwork Mom asked me to find." But she couldn't meet my eyes. That night at dinner, the tension finally boiled over. Melissa slammed her fork down and stared straight at me. "You know what?" she said loudly. "I think you've been faking this disability for 5 years." The room went silent. I felt heat rush to my face. "I think you love playing the victim," she continued. "It must be nice having an excuse to mooch off everyone." I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something. He didn't. He kept eating. My mother stared at her plate. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but before I could speak, Melissa leaned in close, her smile still in place. Her breath brushed my ear. "If you disappeared," she whispered, "this family could finally breathe again." My stomach dropped. She leaned back like she had just told a harmless joke. No one else reacted. Either they didn't hear her, or they chose not to. Later that evening, I passed my parents' bedroom and heard my mother on the phone. "Melissa's just stressed about money," she said softly. "She doesn't mean the things she says. You know how sisters are." I stood frozen in the hallway. My mother had heard the threat, and she had decided it was easier to explain it away. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I told myself I was exhausted, emotional, recovering from surgery. Maybe I was seeing danger where there was only dysfunction. I wheeled myself outside to get some fresh air. The backyard sloped gently downward toward a concrete drainage ditch at the far end of the property. My father had reluctantly installed a wooden ramp for me, and I used it slowly, carefully, the way I always did. Halfway across the lawn, my wheelchair suddenly surged forward. I grabbed for the wheels, trying to slow myself down. The brakes didn't respond. The chair picked up speed. My heart slammed against my ribs as I realized I was heading straight for the ditch. I threw my arm out in pure instinct and caught the edge of the garden railing. Pain exploded through my shoulder, but the impact stopped the chair inches from disaster. I sat there shaking, gasping for air. Within seconds, my family rushed outside. My father examined the wheelchair briefly. "The ground's wet," he said flatly. "You need to be more careful." The ground wasn't wet, but I didn't argue. I looked at Melissa instead. She stood behind our parents, her face arranged into concern. But just for a split second before she masked it, I saw something else: disappointment. That afternoon, while everyone else was distracted, I called an old colleague named Daniel. He had worked in maintenance at my old job and had always treated me with quiet respect. I asked him to come over and look at my wheelchair without telling anyone. He arrived that evening and spent 20 minutes inspecting the brakes. When he finally looked up, his face had gone pale. "Amber," he said quietly, "these were deliberately loosened." My chest tightened. "This isn't wear and tear. Someone did this on purpose." After he left, I locked myself in my room and cried into my pillow until my throat hurt. I already knew the truth, but hearing it out loud made it real. My own sister was trying to kill me. I knew then that I couldn't rely on my family. I couldn't confront Melissa directly. And I couldn't go to the police without proof. So I made a choice. I stopped being passive. I bought small recording devices and hid them where no one would think to look. One in my bedroom, one in the garage. I started documenting everything: conversations, behavior, timelines. While hiding the recorder among my father's tools, I found an envelope buried in his desk drawer. It was from an insurance company, connected to my workplace accident. His name appeared on several documents. I didn't understand what it meant yet, but I photographed everything. Something told me this story was bigger than my sister, and whatever my family was hiding, I was finally ready to uncover it. Once I started recording, everything around me felt different. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage where everyone was pretending, and I was the only one who knew the script was fake. I began paying attention to details I had ignored for years. The way my father avoided eye contact whenever I mentioned my accident. The way my mother busied herself with chores whenever Melissa became cruel, as if wiping counters could erase reality. And Melissa, she moved through the house with restless energy, constantly on her phone, constantly disappearing into quiet corners to whisper urgent conversations. I stopped confronting her. Instead, I observed. Every morning, I would wheel myself into the living room and sit quietly, pretending to scroll on my phone while listening to footsteps, voices, doors opening and closing. Every night, I replayed the recordings with headphones pressed tight against my ears, my heart hammering as I waited for something, anything that would confirm what I already knew. At first, there was nothing, just silence, the creak of the garage door, my father's tools clinking softly, Melissa pacing back and forth. Then one evening, I overheard Melissa arguing on the phone in the hallway. "I don't care what it costs anymore," she snapped. "If I don't fix this soon, I lose everything." Quote, "Now we have," her voice shook. I caught fragments as she moved farther away. "Can't declare bankruptcy yet. The house is worth enough. I just need a little time." That was when I realized how desperate she truly was. Whatever financial hole she had dug for herself, it was deep, and she was running out of options. Later that night, I wheeled quietly into the attic, pretending I was still sorting through Grandma Eleanor's belongings. In reality, I was looking for anything Melissa might have taken, or anything she might be searching for. That was when I found the empty jewelry box. My grandmother had kept a small velvet box in the back of her closet, where she stored a few heirloom pieces. It was gone. I didn't accuse Melissa. I didn't tell my parents. I simply added it to the growing list of things that no longer felt like coincidence. The next morning at breakfast, Melissa acted unusually cheerful. She made toast for everyone. She asked about my physical therapy. She even offered to help clean the kitchen afterward. The sudden kindness made my skin crawl. I had lived with her my whole life. I knew what fake concern looked like. That afternoon, Mr. Harris approached me while I sat on the front porch. He glanced nervously toward our house before speaking. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. He guided me slowly through his garden, away from windows, away from ears. "I worked with your father years ago," he said quietly. "Same company, same department." My heart skipped. He took a deep breath. "I know what really happened with your accident, Amber." The words hit me harder than I expected. I demanded to know why he hadn't said anything before. He lowered his eyes. "I didn't have proof, just suspicion. And I didn't think you'd believe a stranger over your own family." He paused, his voice heavy. "But when I saw you come back in that wheelchair after surgery, I couldn't stay silent anymore." I asked him what he meant. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. You need more pieces first. Just be careful. The danger isn't only your sister." That warning echoed in my head long after I rolled back inside. That night, I checked the garage recorder again. My hands trembled as I plugged in my earbuds. At first, there was only silence. Then footsteps. Then Melissa's voice. Clear, cold. "Brakes are done," she said, speaking into what sounded like a voice memo on her phone. "She won't survive the hill." I stopped breathing. "I have to finish this before her birthday," Melissa continued, "before she takes everything Grandma meant for me." There was a pause. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "There's no other choice." I sat in the dark, replaying that recording over and over until my ears rang. My sister had just confessed to planning my murder, and she had a deadline: 3 days. 3 days until my 35th birthday. 3 days until Grandma's trust became legally mine. I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like movement. I locked my bedroom door at night, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. But fear wasn't my strongest emotion anymore. Clarity was. I understood something important about my family. If I went to the police with just audio, Melissa would say it was taken out of context. My parents would back her up. They would tell officers I was emotional, traumatized, unstable after surgery. They had spent my entire life minimizing my voice. They would do it again. So I made a decision that terrified me. I would let Melissa make her move. But this time, I would control the outcome. I called Mr. Harris and explained everything. He was reluctant at first. He didn't like the idea of me putting myself in danger. But eventually, he agreed to help. I shared my phone's GPS location with him. If I text you the word now, call 911 immediately, I told him. Don't hesitate. He promised. I tested my phone camera, practicing angles from inside my jacket pocket, making sure the lens pointed forward. I practiced keeping my voice steady. I practiced breathing through panic. The next day, Melissa approached me with a softness I hadn't seen in weeks. "Amber," she said gently, "I've been thinking. Things have been tense between us. Maybe we could go to the park tomorrow. Just the two of us, like when we were kids." Every instinct in my body screamed danger. But I smiled. "That sounds nice," I said. From across the room, I noticed my father watching us through the living room window. His expression wasn't worried. It was expectant. And that was when I knew. Whatever Melissa was planning, my father already knew about it. The night before we went to the park, I didn't sleep at all. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow rhythm of the house breathing around me. Pipes clicked, floorboards whispered. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed softly. Every ordinary sound felt amplified, as if my body already knew what was coming and refused to rest. I kept replaying Melissa's recorded voice in my head. "She won't survive the hill." Those words looped endlessly. I thought about all the moments in our childhood when she had pushed past me to be first in line, first to speak, first to be praised. I remembered how she used to take my toys and tell our parents they were hers. I remembered how she learned early that if she cried loudly enough, adults stopped asking questions. And I wondered how many small acts of cruelty had quietly grown into something capable of murder. Around 3 a.m, I got out of bed and rolled quietly into the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older than 35. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with shadows. Her shoulders were hunched from weeks in a wheelchair. But beneath the fear, I saw something else forming. Resolve. If Melissa thought she could erase me, she had underestimated how much survival instinct lives inside a woman who has already lost everything once. Before dawn, I sent Mr. Harris a short message confirming our plan. "Tomorrow, same location, same signal." He replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. It felt strange to be coordinating my own potential rescue. Morning came quietly. Melissa acted normal, almost cheerful. She made coffee. She asked if I'd packed my jacket. She offered to bring snacks. To anyone watching, she looked like a caring sister trying to reconnect. I wondered how long she had practiced that performance. As we were getting ready to leave, I noticed my father standing near the living room window, pretending to check his phone while watching us. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away. That moment stayed with me, not because he seemed worried, but because he didn't. Melissa pushed my wheelchair down the familiar streets toward Riverside Park. She chatted about childhood memories, about work, about things that didn't matter. I nodded and responded when necessary, carefully positioning my phone inside my jacket pocket, making sure the camera lens faced outward. My heart beat steadily, slower than I expected. Fear had sharpened me. The park was quiet that afternoon. A few distant joggers passed near the entrance, but Melissa guided us away from the main paths, steering toward a trail that climbed gently through dense trees. "This way," she said. "It's prettier." The farther we went, the more isolated it became. No benches, no families, no cameras. Just dirt paths, tangled roots, and the sound of wind moving through branches. We reached the top of a steep hill overlooking a rocky ravine. Melissa stopped pushing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her voice changed. The sweetness disappeared. "You know," she said, "Grandma always loved you more." I stayed quiet. "I was the one who visited her every week," she continued bitterly. "I held her hand when she was dying, but you were always her favorite." She gripped the wheelchair handles harder. "And now she's giving you everything from beyond the grave." Her breathing quickened. The house, the trust, everything that should have been mine. I finally turned my head slightly, just enough to look at her. "There was room for both of us," I said quietly. She laughed. "No, there wasn't." Her voice dropped. "But it doesn't matter anymore." Her hands shoved. The world tilted violently. Gravity took over. The wheels spun uselessly beneath me as I hurtled downhill, wind roaring in my ears. I tried to grab the rims, tried to slow myself, but the sabotaged brakes did nothing. The ravine rushed closer. In that instant, time stretched. I saw rocks waiting below. I felt cold terror surge through my chest. And then, fate intervened. The wheelchair veered slightly to the right and caught the edge of a thick bush lining the trail. Branches tore at my sleeves and skin, slowing my descent just enough for the chair to tip sideways. I was thrown onto a patch of grass and rolled several feet before coming to a stop. Pain exploded through my shoulder and ribs, but I was alive. I lay there gasping, my body shaking uncontrollably. From above, I heard shouting. Mr. Harris emerged from the trees, moving faster than I thought possible for a man his age. "I saw everything," he yelled. "I saw what you did. I am not..." and raided. Melissa reacted instantly. She rushed down the slope, her face rearranging itself into horror. "Oh my God, Amber!" she cried. "Are you okay?" "The chair just slipped. I tried to stop it." She reached for me, but I was ready. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and held it up. The video was still recording. "I got everything," I said, my voice shaking but steady. Every word, every push. Her face drained of color. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Sirens cut through the quiet park minutes later. Mr. Harris had already called 911. As police officers approached, Melissa began to cry, insisting it was an accident. I handed over my phone. They watched in silence. And in that moment, my sister's carefully constructed world began to collapse. The police arrived faster than I expected. Red and blue lights washed over the trees, cutting through the quiet park like something unreal. An officer knelt beside me, while another helped Mr. Harris guide my wheelchair back upright. My whole body trembled from shock and pain, but my mind felt strangely clear, as if everything I had been preparing for had finally arrived. Melissa stood a few feet away, crying loudly, hands pressed to her face. "It was an accident," she kept saying. "I tried to stop it. The chair just slipped." I didn't answer her. I handed my phone to the nearest officer. "It's all on video," I said. He nodded and walked a few steps away, replaying the footage while his partner watched over his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Their expressions changed slowly, first confusion, then disbelief, then something heavier. They came back with quiet professionalism. "Ma'am," one of them said to Melissa, "we need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." Melissa froze. For a moment, she looked genuinely confused, as if she couldn't understand how this was happening. Then panic flooded her face. "This is insane," she cried. "She's lying. She's unstable. She's been emotional since surgery." I interrupted her. "You said Grandma loved me more," I told the officers. "You said I wouldn't get anything." She stared at me in shock. I hadn't been supposed to remember that part. They cuffed her anyway. As they led her toward the patrol car, something inside her finally snapped. She started screaming. "This isn't fair. Why am I the only one getting arrested?" Her voice broke apart. "Dad knew. He knew everything. He said if she was gone, everything would work out. He promised he'd help me contest the trust." The park went silent. Even the officers paused. I felt the world tilt again, but this time it wasn't physical. My father knew. The words crashed through me in slow motion. Melissa kept talking, sobbing hysterically. He said he had lawyers. He said he could make problems disappear. He even looked into having Amber declared mentally unstable so the trust would be void. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, everything made sense. My father leaving the dinner table when I mentioned reopening my accident. His whispered phone call in the garage. The insurance envelope I had found in his desk. Mr. Harris's warning that the danger wasn't just Melissa. He hadn't just ignored what she was planning. He had encouraged it. I was taken to the hospital for evaluation. Nothing was broken, but my shoulder was badly strained and my ribs were bruised. A nurse gently cleaned the scratches on my arms, while an officer sat nearby, taking my statement. I answered everything calmly. I told them about the recording devices. I told them about the trust. I told them about the loosened brakes. And I told them about the paperwork I had found in my father's desk. That last part caught their attention. 2 days later, detectives came to my apartment with questions. Melissa had stopped resisting. The pressure of evidence, combined with her financial desperation, had cracked her open. She confessed. Not just to sabotaging my wheelchair, to everything. She owed over $200,000 from failed crypto investments. She had drained her savings, maxed out credit cards, and borrowed money she couldn't repay. Foreclosure on her condo was weeks away. When she found Grandma's trust documents, she realized my death before my birthday would void the agreement. The house would revert to standard inheritance laws. She could force a sale. She would get her share. That money would save her. All it required was my life. But Melissa didn't stop there. She told investigators she had gone to our father for help. She told him she wished I would just disappear. And instead of stopping her, he offered solutions. He told her he could help contest the trust. He said he knew attorneys who could make things quiet. He even researched ways to declare me legally incapacitated if her plan failed. My own father had been preparing to destroy me either way. Then Mr. Harris stepped forward. He provided sworn statements and documents he had kept hidden for 5 years. What he revealed shattered whatever remained of my belief in my family. My father had been the safety compliance manager at the plant where I was injured. He had discovered serious violations, faulty equipment, missing safety guards. Fixing them would have cost millions. Instead, he falsified inspection reports. 3 months later, the exact machine he had certified as safe collapsed. It crushed my spine. While I lay sedated in the hospital after emergency surgery, my father negotiated secretly with the company. He forged my signature on documents waiving liability. In exchange, he received early retirement and a severance package of $150,000. He had sold my future. The investigators explained that because my father committed fraud, the statute of limitations on my lawsuit had been paused. I still had the right to sue, but knowing that didn't soften the truth. The man who was supposed to protect me had crippled me for money. My mother came to see me a week later. She cried. She begged. She said she never meant for any of this to happen. I asked her one question. What did you know? She admitted she had overheard Melissa say, I wish she would just disappear. She told herself it was stress. She also admitted she knew my father had handled something related to my accident. She never asked details. Ignorance had been easier. I looked at her and said quietly, You chose comfort over my life. She had no answer. The trials lasted 14 months. Melissa accepted a plea deal for attempted murder. She was sentenced to 12 years, with eligibility for parole after 8. My father received 3 years for fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice, plus $500,000 in fines. It wasn't enough, but it was accountability. The civil case against the company ended with a $2.1 million settlement, money I should have had years ago. Money my father tried to steal. I used part of it to rebuild my life. I used part of it to honor my grandmother. And for the first time since the accident, I finally felt something close to peace. After the court dates were set and the headlines faded, something unexpected happened. The noise stopped. For months, my life had been filled with sirens, interrogations, paperwork, whispered conversations with lawyers, and the constant weight of being everyone's case. Suddenly, there were no detectives calling, no reporters outside my apartment, no legal documents arriving every morning. Just silence. And in that silence, I finally had to sit with everything. I had survived my sister's attempt on my life. I had exposed my father's betrayal. I had forced the truth into the open. But survival doesn't immediately bring peace. Sometimes it just leaves you standing in the wreckage, wondering who you are now that the storm has passed. My body was still healing. Physical therapy became my new full-time job. 3 days a week, sometimes 4, I worked with therapists who pushed me harder than I thought possible. Every stretch burned. Every step felt like climbing a mountain. Some days I cried in the car afterward because my muscles refused to cooperate. Other days I cried because they did. The doctors had always said recovery would be unpredictable. They were right. Some mornings I woke up feeling stronger. Other mornings I couldn't get out of bed without help. But slowly, painfully, my legs began to remember what they were supposed to do. The wheelchair didn't disappear overnight. But one afternoon, after weeks of practice, my therapist handed me a wooden cane. "Let's try," she said. I stood. My knees shook. My hands gripped the parallel bars. Sweat ran down my back. But I stood. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't steady. But it was mine. That moment felt bigger than any courtroom victory. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward without me needing to push anymore. Melissa had taken a plea deal. 12 years in federal prison. 8 before she'd even be eligible for parole. I didn't go to every hearing, but I did attend the sentencing. She wouldn't look at me. My father stood at the defense table during his own proceedings, suddenly smaller than I remembered. He avoided my eyes the entire time. When the judge listed his crimes, fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice, I felt something inside me finally settle. Not relief. Closure. He was sentenced to 3 years and heavy fines. It didn't undo the damage he caused, but it ended his ability to hurt anyone else. My mother faced no criminal charges. There's no law against willful blindness. But I filed for a restraining order. The judge granted it. She is legally prohibited from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home. Some people told me that was harsh, that she was also a victim in her own way. Maybe, but she heard her daughter wish me dead and chose silence. I chose distance. The civil case against the manufacturing company concluded quietly. Because my father had forged my signature and hidden my right to sue, the statute of limitations had been paused. After months of negotiation, the court awarded me $2.1 million in damages. It was money I should have received years ago, money that would have paid for surgeries, therapy, lost wages, money my father had tried to steal. I didn't feel rich when it hit my account. I felt validated. I moved out of the small apartment I'd rented during the investigation and found a modest 1-bedroom downtown. Big windows, lots of light, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I bought furniture slowly, chose colors carefully. I hung photos of places I wanted to visit someday. For the first time in my adult life, I decorated without worrying whether someone else approved. Mr. Harris became a permanent part of my life. Every Sunday, we shared dinner, sometimes at my place, sometimes at his, sometimes at a quiet restaurant where we could sit for hours without being rushed. He never treated me like someone fragile. He treated me like someone who had survived. One evening, while we watched the sun sink behind the rooftops, he finally told me everything. He admitted that 5 years ago, he had suspected what my father had done at the factory but hadn't spoken up. He said the guilt followed him every day. "When I saw you come home in that wheelchair," he told me quietly, "I knew I'd been given a second chance. I wasn't going to stay silent again." I reached over and squeezed his hand. He had made mistakes, but he had also saved my life. That mattered. The family house sat empty for months while I decided what to do with it. I could have sold it. The market was strong. The money would have been substantial. But every time I considered listing it, I thought about Grandma Eleanor. I thought about her sitting at the kitchen table with me when I was young, letting me talk without interrupting. I thought about how she saw me when no one else did. Selling the house felt like erasing her. So instead, I chose to transform it. With part of the settlement money, I renovated the space and opened it as a small shelter for elderly women escaping family abuse, financial exploitation, or abandonment. I named it Eleanor's House. On opening day, 3 women arrived with small suitcases and nervous eyes. One of them, 68 years old, whose own daughter had drained her life savings, took my hand and whispered, "I didn't know where else to go." "You're safe now," I told her, and I meant it. I also started a new career. I became a safety compliance consultant. The irony wasn't lost on me. I now help companies identify exactly the kinds of violations that once destroyed my body. Every workplace I make safer feels like reclaiming a piece of what was taken from me. Not revenge. Purpose. Before Eleanor's house officially opened, I found a letter hidden inside one of Grandma's old books. "My dearest Amber," it read. "If you're reading this, you've survived whatever storm that family created. I always knew you were the strongest of them all." I cried harder than I had in months. She had seen me, even from beyond the grave. Recovery didn't erase the scars. Some nights I still wake up remembering the sound of wheels on dirt. Some days I still grieve the family I thought I had, but I also walk now. Not perfectly, not without effort, but I walk, and every step reminds me that I'm still here, alive, unbroken, and finally, free. The official opening of Eleanor's house happened on a warm Tuesday afternoon. I remember standing on the front porch, leaning lightly on my cane, watching sunlight spill across the freshly painted walls. The garden beds had been replanted with lavender and rosemary, her favorites. For a moment, I closed my eyes and breathed it in, letting the scent carry me back to childhood afternoons when Grandma Eleanor would let me sit beside her while she tended flowers, telling me stories about her life before I was born. Back then, she was the only one who ever listened without interrupting. I had invited only a few people to the opening. Mr. Harris was there, of course. A couple of social workers who had helped me navigate permits and licensing. No press, no ceremony. I didn't want speeches or ribbon cutting. I wanted something quiet, something real. The first residents arrived just after 2 o'clock. 3 elderly women stepped out of a van, each carrying a small bag and an expression that mixed fear with fragile hope. They moved slowly, cautiously, as if expecting someone to tell them they didn't belong here. I walked toward them. "You're home," I said gently. One of them, a woman named Ruth, 68 years old, reached for my hand. Her fingers trembled as she held on. "My daughter took everything," she whispered. "My savings, my pension. I didn't know where else to go." I squeezed her hand. "You're safe now." Those words felt heavier than any courtroom testimony. Inside, we showed them their rooms, explained how meals worked, where to find blankets, who to call if they needed anything in the middle of the night. They thanked me over and over, their voices soft, careful, as if gratitude itself might take up too much space. After they were settled, I stepped back outside and sat on the porch beside Mr. Harris. He handed me a cup of tea without asking. "She would be proud," he said quietly. I nodded. I knew she would. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house finally grew still, I wandered into the old living room. The furniture was new, but the bones of the place were the same. The same windows, the same creaky floorboards, the same spot where Grandma used to sit with her knitting. I ran my fingers along the bookshelf and pulled out one of her old novels. That's when I felt something tucked between the pages. A folded piece of paper. My heart skipped. I opened it slowly, already recognizing her handwriting. "My dearest Amber," it began. "If you're reading this, you've survived whatever storm that family created. I always knew you were the strongest of them all. I couldn't protect you the way I wanted while I was alive, but I trusted that one day you would protect yourself." Tears blurred the words. "I hope you use this house to bring light where there was once silence. I hope you build something beautiful from the pain they gave you. And I hope you finally believe what I always knew. I'm so proud of you." I pressed the letter against my chest and cried. Not the sharp, panicked crying I had done after the park. Not the exhausted crying from physical therapy sessions. This was quieter, deeper. This was grief and gratitude tangled together. A few days later, I wrote one last letter, not to my parents, not to my lawyers, to Melissa. I didn't write it for reconciliation. I wrote it for closure. "You tried to take my life because you believed Grandma's love was something to compete over," I wrote. But love isn't a prize. There was room for both of us. You just couldn't see it through your jealousy. I don't forgive you. Some things can't be forgiven. But I don't hate you either. Hate would keep me tied to you forever. And I've already spent too many years living in your shadow. I choose freedom. I hope someday, in that cell, you find a way to live with what you've done. Not for my sake. For yours. I never heard back. I didn't expect to. Around that time, investigators informed Melissa about something else. 8 years earlier, when she had just started her career, I had co-signed a $30,000 car loan for her. She had missed payments repeatedly over the years, but the loan had never gone to collections. She assumed the bank had been lenient. They showed her the records. I had set up automatic payments from my own account. For 8 years, I had quietly covered her debt. I never told her. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted her to succeed. When detectives told me later how she reacted, how she broke down sobbing when she realized the sister she tried to kill had been protecting her credit all along, I felt no satisfaction, only sadness. Because she finally understood who I was, and it was far too late. My mother tried to contact me several times through third parties. She left messages saying she missed me, that she wanted to talk, that she needed closure. I didn't respond. Closure doesn't come from reopening wounds. It comes from choosing peace. Some evenings, when Eleanor's house is quiet and the residents are settled, I sit on the porch with Mr. Harris and watch the sunset. We don't always talk. Sometimes we just listen to the cicadas and let the day end slowly. He once told me, "Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when you're breaking." I think about that often, because I lost the family I was born into, but I gained something else. I gained clarity. I gained purpose. I gained the strength to build a new kind of home. I walk now, not perfectly, not without effort, but I walk. I help protect workers from unsafe companies. I help elderly women find shelter after betrayal. And every morning when I wake up, I remind myself of something simple and powerful. I survived. Not just the fall, not just the lies. I survived becoming someone who finally chose herself. People think the hardest part of surviving something like this is the moment of danger. They imagine the push down the hill, the police lights, the courtroom verdicts, but they're wrong. The hardest part comes later, when everything is quiet. After Melissa was sentenced, after my father was taken away, after Eleanor's house opened and life began to look almost normal again, I found myself struggling in ways I hadn't expected. There were no sirens anymore. No urgent phone calls from detectives, no lawyers asking for documents, just long mornings and empty afternoons. That silence forced me to finally sit with what I had lost. I didn't just lose my sister. I lost the idea of who she was supposed to be. I didn't just lose my father. I lost the belief that a parent will always protect their child. And I didn't just lose a family. I lost a version of myself that still hoped they might change. Some nights, I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing as I replayed the sound of wheels on dirt. Other times, I'd find myself frozen in grocery store aisles when someone walked too close behind me. Trauma doesn't announce itself politely. It shows up in small, inconvenient ways, long after everyone else thinks you're better. I started seeing a therapist. At first, I didn't want to talk. I told her I was fine, that I was moving forward, that I had work to do and people depending on me. She listened quietly, then asked a simple question. When was the last time you grieved? I didn't have an answer, so we began slowly. We talked about the accident, about waking up in a hospital bed unable to feel my legs, about learning how to transfer into a wheelchair, about pretending I was okay when I wasn't. Then we talked about Melissa, about growing up, competing for attention without realizing we were being placed in that position, about how resentment grows when feelings are ignored, about how jealousy becomes dangerous when it's fed with entitlement. We talked about my mother's silence, how neglect doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like turning away. And finally, we talked about my father. That one took time. I had spent years trying to earn his approval without knowing he had already decided I was expendable. Accepting that truth felt heavier than any physical injury. At Eleanor's house, the women taught me things too. They shared stories over tea in the evenings about adult children who emptied their bank accounts, siblings who forced them out of their homes, relatives who treated them like burdens instead of human beings. Their experiences mirrored mine in different ways. One woman told me, "I spent 40 years trying to make my family love me properly." Her voice didn't carry bitterness, just exhaustion. That sentence stayed with me. I realized how much of my own life had been shaped by that same quiet effort trying to be easier, quieter, stronger, more forgiving, hoping it would earn me safety. It never had. The house became more than a shelter. It became a place where broken trust was spoken out loud, where survival stories were shared without shame, where nobody had to minimize their pain to make others comfortable. Meanwhile, my new work as a safety compliance consultant kept me grounded. Walking through factories and warehouses, pointing out missing guards and faulty equipment, I felt a strange sense of purpose. Every corrected violation felt like reclaiming a piece of my past. I couldn't undo what happened to me, but I could prevent it from happening to someone else. Some days, I still used my cane. Other days, I didn't need it. Progress came in waves. I learned not to measure healing in milestones, but in moments standing long enough to cook dinner, walking through the park without fear, sleeping through the night. One evening, Mr. Harris and I sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange and pink. "You know," he said softly, "people talk about forgiveness like it's mandatory." I nodded. He continued, "But sometimes, peace comes from acceptance, not forgiveness." He was right. I didn't forgive my sister. I didn't forgive my father. I accepted what they had done, and I chose not to let it define the rest of my life. My mother sent another message through a mutual acquaintance. She said she just wanted to hear my voice. I declined. I had already said everything that mattered. Closure doesn't require conversation when accountability never existed. Some weekends, I walk through the garden at Eleanor's house and watch the residents laugh together on the benches. I see women who arrived with nothing slowly begin to smile again. I hear them make plans for tomorrow, and I understand something now that I didn't before. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding. I still carry scars, physical and emotional, but they don't own me. I am not the woman in the wheelchair at the top of the hill anymore. I am not the invisible daughter waiting to be chosen. I am a survivor who learned how to stand. I am a woman who turned betrayal into shelter. I am someone who finally understands that family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by who shows up when your world falls apart. And if you're listening to this, and any part of my story feels familiar, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, please know this. You are not weak for feeling hurt. You are not dramatic for needing distance. And you are allowed to build a life that doesn't include people who choose to harm you. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stay. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is finally choose yourself. Freedom doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't show up with fireworks or dramatic music. It comes quietly, in small moments you barely notice at first. The first time I walked through a grocery store without gripping my cane too tightly. The first morning I woke up and didn't immediately think about courtrooms or hospital hallways. The first time I laughed without feeling guilty for surviving. Those were the moments when I realized I was finally moving forward. For a long time, I thought freedom meant justice. I thought it meant seeing Melissa taken away in handcuffs. I thought it meant watching my father stand in front of a judge while his crimes were read aloud. And those moments mattered. They closed chapters that had been left open for too long. But real freedom started later, when I began learning how to live without constantly scanning for danger. I spent a lot of time walking the neighborhood around Eleanor's house. Not for exercise, though, that helped, but because I wanted to reconnect with the world in ordinary ways. I wanted to hear children riding bikes, dogs barking behind fences, neighbors chatting over hedges. I wanted to feel normal again. Sometimes residents would join me. Ruth liked to walk slowly beside me, telling stories about the job she'd loved before retirement. Another woman, Margaret, would sit on the porch and wave when we passed. They were rebuilding their lives in their own quiet ways, just like I was. Watching them heal reminded me that recovery doesn't follow a schedule. It follows courage. One afternoon, while organizing old documents, I found a folder from years ago labeled Family. Inside were photos from holidays, birthday cards, school certificates. I sat on the floor and flipped through them slowly. There I was at 8 years old, smiling beside Melissa, both of us missing front teeth. There was my father holding a fishing rod behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder. There was my mother hugging me on graduation day. For a moment, I let myself mourn what those images represented, the family I thought I had, the safety I assumed was real. Then I closed the folder, because nostalgia can be dangerous when it tries to rewrite history. I didn't destroy the photos. I just stopped letting them speak louder than the truth. Boundaries became my new form of self-respect. I stopped answering messages passed along from relatives who wanted to stay neutral. I declined invitations to family gatherings where people pretended nothing had happened. I refused to engage in conversations that tried to frame accountability as cruelty. Some people called me cold. I called it survival. Mr. Harris once told me something that stuck. People who benefit from your silence will always be uncomfortable when you finally speak. He was right. I learned to sit with that discomfort. I also learned that chosen family feels different. Chosen family doesn't minimize your pain. Chosen family doesn't ask you to forgive before you're ready. Chosen family doesn't expect you to sacrifice yourself for harmony. Chosen family shows up with soup when you're exhausted. They sit quietly beside you when words feel too heavy. They celebrate your progress, even when it's slow. On Sundays, Mr. Harris and I continued our dinners. Sometimes we talked about books, sometimes about politics, sometimes about nothing at all. But those evenings grounded me in something simple and steady. Connection without obligation. Trust without history. That's what healing looks like. My work continued to grow. More companies reached out for safety evaluations. I trained supervisors, walked factory floors, reviewed protocols. Every time I pointed out a hazard and watched it get corrected, I felt like I was quietly rewriting my own story. I wasn't just a victim of negligence anymore. I was part of preventing it. One evening, while reviewing reports, I realized something that surprised me. I hadn't thought about Melissa in days. Not with anger, not with sadness, not at all. That absence felt like progress. People often ask if I forgive her. I tell them the truth. I don't, but I don't carry her with me either. Forgiveness is not the same as release. Release is letting go of the weight. And I released her when I stopped needing answers from someone who never offered accountability. The same is true for my father. I no longer replay his betrayal in my mind. I no longer wonder how a parent could choose money over their child. Some questions don't deserve your energy. My therapist once asked me what legacy I wanted to leave behind. At first, I didn't know how to answer. Then I thought about Eleanor's house. I thought about the women who now sleep safely under its roof. I thought about the workplaces that are safer because of my inspections. I thought about the quiet strength I see in my own reflection now. I want to leave behind proof that pain doesn't have to be wasted, I told her. That felt right. Some evenings, I stand in the backyard garden and watch the residents laugh together. I see shoulders relax. I hear stories being shared. I feel the space fill with something that wasn't here before. Hope. That's my grandmother's real inheritance. Not walls. Not property. Possibility. If you had told me years ago that I would lose my sister, my father, and my sense of family all at once, I would have thought that kind of loss would destroy me. Instead, it clarified me. It taught me what love is not. It taught me what strength looks like. And it taught me that surviving isn't about becoming harder. It's about becoming truer. So, if you're listening to this, and you're standing at the edge of your own breaking point, please hear this. You don't owe loyalty to people who hurt you. You don't owe forgiveness to people who refuse accountability. And you don't owe access to anyone who treats your existence as optional. Your life matters. Your boundaries matter. And it's never too late to build something better from what tried to break you. Gratitude changed shape for me after everything happened. It stopped being something I felt only on good days. It became something I practiced on the hard ones. I learned to be grateful for small victories, the mornings when my legs felt strong enough to carry me through the kitchen without reaching for the counter, the afternoons when I could sit in the garden at Eleanor's house and listen to the residents talk about their plans for tomorrow, the evenings when I came home tired but peaceful instead of exhausted and afraid. For a long time, survival had been my only goal. Now I was learning how to live. I started keeping a notebook by my bed. Every night before sleeping, I wrote down 3 things that had gone right that day. Some nights the list was simple. I walked 2 extra blocks. I cooked dinner without needing to sit down. Ruth laughed at one of my terrible jokes. Other nights were heavier. I made it through a difficult therapy session. I didn't answer messages that tried to pull me back into old family dynamics. I spoke honestly about my past without apologizing for it. Those entries became proof that healing doesn't arrive in dramatic waves. It arrives in consistency. One afternoon, while organizing files at Eleanor's house, I found a box of old thank you cards from residents who had stayed with us and moved on to new chapters. Some had written only a few lines. Others had filled entire pages. One woman wrote, "You gave me back my dignity when everyone else treated me like a problem." I sat on the floor and cried. Not from sadness, from understanding. I had spent years being invisible in my own family. Now I was helping people feel seen. That felt like balance. My work continued to expand. I was invited to speak at safety training seminars, sharing my story with supervisors and engineers who had never considered what a single ignored violation could do to someone's life. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. And every time someone approached me afterward and said, "I'm going to take this more seriously now," I felt like a small piece of justice was being served. Not in courtrooms, in choices. Sometimes, people ask how I found the strength to keep going. I tell them strength wasn't something I suddenly discovered. It was something I built. I built it during physical therapy when my legs shook and my hands cramped and I wanted to quit. I built it when I refused to engage in conversations that tried to minimize what happened to me. I built it when I chose to invest in Eleanor's house instead of selling the property for profit. I built it when I wrote that final letter to Melissa and meant every word. Strength grew from repetition, from showing up even when it hurt. There are still moments when grief sneaks up on me. I'll see a mother and daughter laughing together in a cafe and feel a familiar ache in my chest. I'll hear someone mention their dad with affection and feel something tighten inside me. I allow those moments. I don't shame myself for them. Loss deserves space. But I don't let those feelings pull me backward. I remind myself that my story didn't end with betrayal. It continued with choice. Mr. Harris once told me something I carry with me. "You didn't just survive," he said. "You transformed." He was right. I transformed a house of painful memories into a place of refuge. I transformed anger into advocacy. I transformed isolation into connection. And I transformed myself from someone waiting to be loved into someone who knows her worth. One evening, after everyone had settled in for the night at Eleanor's house, I stood alone in the hallway and listened to the quiet breathing of the building. Doors closed softly. Lights dimmed. Somewhere, a woman coughed in her sleep. I thought about how close I came to never hearing those sounds. I thought about the hill, the wheels, the moment gravity took over. And I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for surviving, but for what survival had allowed me to become. People often think revenge looks like punishment. To me, revenge looks like peace. It looks like walking through my apartment barefoot in the morning light. It looks like mentoring a young safety inspector who reminds me of who I used to be. It looks like elderly women sharing recipes in a kitchen that once held silence. It looks like boundaries that protect instead of isolate. I don't need my sister to understand what she lost. I don't need my father to apologize. I don't need my mother to finally speak up. I already have what matters. My life, my purpose, my freedom. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's possible to rebuild after betrayal, I want you to know something. You don't have to become bitter to become strong. You don't have to erase your past to create a future. And you don't have to wait for the people who hurt you to change before you start healing. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step forward alone. And sometimes That's how you discover just how powerful you really are. For a long time, I thought forgiveness was something I owed people. I grew up hearing that holding on to anger would poison my heart, that letting go meant excusing what had been done, that being the bigger person required reopening doors that had nearly crushed me. But healing taught me something different. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. Safety is. After everything that happened, people began asking questions I wasn't prepared for. Have you forgiven your sister? Have you talked to your dad? Don't you think your mother deserves another chance? They asked as if forgiveness were a finish line, as if reconciliation were proof of strength. I learned to answer gently. I told them I had released my family. Release doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means refusing to carry it forward. I didn't forgive Melissa for trying to kill me. I didn't forgive my father for selling my future. And I didn't forgive my mother for choosing silence. But I also didn't let their choices dictate who I became. That distinction saved me. Some nights, when Eleanor's house was quiet and the residents were asleep, I sat alone in the living room and thought about the girl I used to be. The one who tried harder when she felt ignored. The one who accepted crumbs of affection and called it love. The one who believed family loyalty required self-sacrifice. I wished I could sit beside her and tell her the truth. You don't have to earn your right to exist. You don't have to suffer quietly to keep peace. And you don't have to stay where you're unsafe just because you share DNA. Letting go of that old version of myself was harder than walking away from my parents, because she had been my survival strategy for 35 years. But I didn't need her anymore. One afternoon, while organizing donated clothes in the shelter, Ruth came up beside me. "You look lighter," she said. I smiled. "I feel lighter." She nodded thoughtfully. "When I left my son's house, I thought I was losing my family," she told me. "Turns out, I was finding myself." Her words echoed something I had been learning slowly. Sometimes leaving is an act of self-respect. I stopped checking prison updates about Melissa. I stopped rereading court documents. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I began focusing on the people who were here, the women who shared stories over breakfast, the volunteers who showed up every week, Mr. Harris, who never let me feel alone even on days when memories weighed heavy, and myself. I began treating my own needs with the same seriousness I gave everyone else's. That meant resting when I was tired. That meant saying no without explaining. That meant allowing joy without guilt. My therapist once asked me what I missed most about my old life. I thought about it for a long time. Then I answered honestly. I miss who I thought my family was. She nodded. "That's grief," she said. So I let myself grieve. I grieved the sister who could have been my ally. I grieved the father who could have protected me. I grieved the mother who could have spoken up. I grieved the childhood I spent trying to be good enough. Grief doesn't mean weakness. It means you cared, but I didn't stay there. I learned to make peace with reality instead of arguing with it. Reality said my family had failed me. Reality also said I survived. Reality said I now had a chance to build something different. And I chose to believe the second part mattered more. Some evenings, I walk through Eleanor's house after everyone has gone to bed. I turn off lights, straighten chairs, and pause at each doorway just to check that everyone is safe. That ritual grounds me. It reminds me that I didn't just escape harm. I created protection. I think about how close I came to losing everything, and how much I gained instead. My legs still ache some mornings. I still carry scars. But I also carry strength. I carry boundaries. I carry clarity. I no longer wait for permission to take up space. I no longer apologize for choosing peace. And I no longer confuse familiarity with love. People often tell me they admire my resilience. I tell them resilience wasn't a choice. Survival was. Everything after that was intentional. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, let me say this clearly. You don't need closure conversations. You don't need mutual understanding. You don't need forgiveness ceremonies. You need safety. You need truth. You need room to breathe. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop explaining yourself to people who already decided not to understand. I didn't forgive my family. I released them. And in doing so, I finally gave myself permission to live. After I released my family, I had to figure out who I was without them. That might sound simple, but when your identity has been shaped for decades by survival, by trying to be acceptable, by shrinking yourself so others feel comfortable, losing that structure feels like standing in open space with no map. For a while, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. There were no more emergency calls, no court deadlines, no tense dinners where I measured every word, just mornings that belonged to me and evenings that didn't require emotional armor. At first, that freedom felt unsettling. I had spent so many years anticipating other people's reactions that I didn't know how to listen to my own. So I started small. I chose what music to play while cooking without wondering if anyone else liked it. I picked books based on curiosity instead of habit. I walked through parks just because I wanted to feel sunlight on my face. Those ordinary choices felt radical. I realized how rarely I had asked myself what I actually wanted. Redefining success became part of that process. Before the accident, success meant promotions, performance reviews, financial independence. After everything, it meant something else entirely. Success became waking up without dread. It became being honest about my limits. It became building Eleanor's house into a place where women felt safe enough to sleep deeply again. I still worked hard, but I no longer measured my worth by productivity alone. I measured it by peace. Some afternoons, I sat with residents in the common room and listened to their stories. One woman had been forced to hand over power of attorney to a nephew who drained her accounts. Another had been pressured into selling her home by her own son. Their experiences echoed mine in painful ways, but what struck me most was how quickly shame followed betrayal. They blamed themselves for trusting. I told them what I had finally learned myself. Trusting doesn't make you weak. Being exploited does not make you responsible. Healing happens when you stop carrying someone else's wrongdoing. My therapist helped me unpack that too. She asked me what I was most proud of. At first, I mentioned Eleanor's house, my consulting work, my physical recovery. She shook her head gently. I mean personally. That took longer. Then I said it. I'm proud that I didn't become bitter. She smiled. That mattered more to me than any legal victory. Some evenings, I journaled about the girl I used to be, the one who believed love had to be earned, the one who stayed quiet when she felt dismissed, the one who accepted scraps of affection and called it family. I thanked her. She had kept me alive long enough to grow, but I also told her she could rest now. I didn't need to perform survival anymore. I could practice living. Walking continued to improve. Some days I moved freely, barely aware of my cane. Other days, my body reminded me of what it had endured. I learned to listen without frustration. Healing isn't linear. It's a conversation between patience and effort. I stopped seeing setbacks as failures. They were just pauses. Mr. Harris noticed the change in me before I did. "You're different," he said one evening as we shared dinner on my balcony. I raised an eyebrow. "Better different," he clarified. "You don't look like you're waiting for something to go wrong anymore." I thought about that. He was right. I wasn't bracing myself for impact. I was making plans. I began hosting small gatherings at Eleanor's house, movie nights, shared meals, simple celebrations of birthdays that had gone unnoticed for years. Watching women who arrived broken slowly begin to laugh again was one of the most powerful things I've ever witnessed. It reminded me that safety creates space for joy. I also started speaking publicly about workplace safety and family exploitation, not in an angry way, in a truthful one. I told audiences how negligence can destroy lives, how silence enables harm, how accountability isn't cruelty, it's responsibility. People listened. Some cried. Some came up afterward and told me their own stories. Pain connects us in ways comfort never can. And slowly, I began to understand that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. Anyone who had been told to be quiet for the sake of peace. Anyone who had learned too late that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. I stopped asking why this happened to me. I started asking what I could do with what remained. The answer was always the same. Live honestly. Protect others. Choose peace. I don't think healing means becoming unrecognizable. I think it means becoming more yourself. I'm still quiet by nature. I still love routines. I still find comfort in simple things like warm tea and clean sheets. But now I also know how to say no. I know how to walk away. And I know how to build a life that doesn't require approval from people who failed me. If you're listening to this and you feel lost after trauma, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to rush your recovery. You don't have to forgive on a timeline. And you don't have to become someone else to deserve peace. Sometimes, finding yourself again is enough. Feeling safe again doesn't happen all at once. It arrives quietly, in fragments, in the way your shoulders drop without you realizing it, in the way your breath slows when you unlock your front door, in the way you stop checking behind you when someone walks too close on the sidewalk. For a long time, I didn't trust that feeling. After everything I had survived, safety felt temporary, something that could disappear if I relaxed too much. My nervous system had learned to stay alert. Even in peaceful moments, part of me was always listening for danger. Healing taught me that vigilance is a habit. So is peace. I started practicing being present. I would sit in the garden at Eleanor's house and name things I could see. Lavender, brick walls, sunlight on leaves. I would listen to the sound of tea kettles in the kitchen, to residents laughing softly in the common room. I trained myself to recognize calm instead of questioning it. The women at the house helped with that more than they realized. They arrived guarded, quiet, carrying years of betrayal in their posture. But over time, they began to soften. They shared stories, recipes, memories of grandchildren. They argued playfully over television shows and took turns watering plants. Watching them rediscover ordinary joy reminded me how powerful safety really is. One afternoon, Ruth asked me why I named the shelter after my grandmother. I told her about Eleanor, about how she was the only one who ever truly saw me growing up, about how she celebrated my achievements when no one else bothered, about the letter she left behind, trusting that I would do something meaningful with the house. Ruth nodded slowly. "Sounds like she gave you permission to become yourself," she said. That landed deep. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. Grandma Eleanor had been my quiet anchor long before I understood what anchors were. Mr. Harris remained my steady constant. We still shared Sunday dinners. Sometimes we talked about the past, sometimes about books, sometimes about nothing at all. He never rushed me when memories surfaced. He never tried to fix things. He simply stayed. That's what real support looks like. Not advice, not pressure, presence. I began to understand that chosen family isn't built through obligation. It's built through consistency, through people who show up without being asked, through trust that grows slowly, honestly. The more I leaned into that, the lighter I felt. I stopped feeling guilty for cutting ties with my parents. I stopped explaining myself to distant relatives who wanted both sides. I stopped shrinking my truth to make others comfortable. Instead, I focused on building routines that supported me. Morning walks, evening journaling, quiet dinners, weekly therapy, monthly safety workshops. Life became structured in a way that felt nourishing instead of exhausting. I also began mentoring younger women who had experienced workplace injuries or family exploitation. Some of them reminded me of myself before the accident, ambitious, hopeful, unaware of how quickly life can change. I didn't scare them with worst-case scenarios. I taught them about boundaries. I taught them to document everything. I taught them that their voice matters. Empowerment doesn't come from fear. It comes from information. One evening, while closing up Eleanor's house, I noticed a resident sitting alone in the living room. Her name was Margaret. She looked small in the oversized chair. "Are you okay?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she said quietly, "I forgot what it feels like to be somewhere I don't have to prove myself." I sat beside her. "That feeling comes back," I told her, slowly. I realized I was talking to myself too. There are still days when old grief surfaces. I'll hear a song from childhood and feel a tightness in my chest. I'll see siblings laughing together and wonder what my life might have been like if things were different. I allow those moments. I don't rush past them, but I don't live in them either. I've learned that resilience isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about refusing to let it dictate your future. I am resilient not because I endured. I am resilient because I rebuilt. I rebuilt my body. I rebuilt my career. I rebuilt my sense of home. And most importantly, I rebuilt my relationship with myself. I no longer measure my worth by how much I tolerate. I measure it by how well I protect my peace. People often tell me they admire my strength. I tell them strength wasn't the goal. Safety was. Purpose was. Connection was. Strength just showed up along the way. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that survival doesn't make you whole. Intentional living does. You don't become healed just because time passes. You become healed because you choose, every day, not to abandon yourself. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether it's possible to feel safe again after betrayal, let me tell you something real. It is, but it won't come from waiting for apologies. It won't come from forcing forgiveness. It comes from building a life that honors what you've been through. From surrounding yourself with people who don't ask you to be smaller. From learning to trust your instincts again. I didn't find safety by going back to what hurt me. I found it by moving forward. And that choice changed everything. Closure doesn't look the way movies teach us it does. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no tearful reunion, no moment where my parents suddenly understood the damage they had done and asked for forgiveness. Closure arrived quietly. It arrived on ordinary mornings when I brewed coffee in my own kitchen and realized no one was waiting to criticize me. It arrived during slow walks through the neighborhood when I noticed my body moving with more confidence. It arrived in the soft laughter drifting down the hallway at Eleanor's house. Closure wasn't a door slamming shut. It was a door, gently closing on its own. For a long time, I thought closure required answers, that I needed explanations from my father, accountability from my mother, remorse from my sister. I imagined conversations that would somehow make everything make sense. But real closure didn't come from them. It came from acceptance. Acceptance that my family failed me. Acceptance that they might never take responsibility. Acceptance that I didn't need their validation to move forward. Once I stopped waiting for them to change, something inside me finally relaxed. I began focusing on legacy. Not in a grand, dramatic way, in the quiet choices that shape everyday life. I thought about Grandma Eleanor often, about how she loved me without competition, about how she saw me even when I felt invisible, about how she trusted me to do something meaningful with the house. Some evenings, I sit in the garden and talk to her out loud. I tell her about the women who arrived scared and left stronger. I tell her about Ruth's cooking experiments and Margaret's new volunteer job. I tell her how the lavender she loved so much is finally blooming again. It feels strange sometimes, but it also feels right. She's still part of this place. Her kindness lives in every room. The residents feel it too, even if they don't know her story. They say the house feels calm. They say they sleep better here. They say it feels safe. That's her legacy. And now, it's mine too. I also began redefining what peace looks like. Peace isn't the absence of memories. It's the absence of fear attached to them. I still remember the hill. I still remember Melissa's voice. I still remember the sound of the wheels. But those memories no longer control me. They're part of my history, not my present. I learned to recognize my own limits. Some days I cancel plans because my body needs rest. Some days, I decline conversations because my heart needs quiet. I no longer explain those choices. Peace doesn't require justification. Mr. Harris once asked me if I ever thought about reconnecting with my parents. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I don't think they're capable of being the people I would need them to be. He nodded. That's wisdom, he said. I used to confuse hope with denial. Now I understand the difference. Hope builds. Denial waits. I also learned that forgiveness is not a prerequisite for peace. Release is. I released my expectations. I released the version of family I had imagined. I released the belief that love must hurt to be real. That release created space for something better. Some nights, after everyone has gone to bed, I walk through Eleanor's house and turn off lights one by one. I pause at each doorway, listening to quiet breathing, checking that blankets are tucked in, that windows are locked, That ritual reminds me how close I came to never doing this. It also reminds me why I keep going. My work continues to grow. I still consult for companies. I still teach safety protocols. I still advocate for people who feel unheard. But I don't measure success by numbers anymore. I measure it by impact. By how many women sleep safely tonight. By how many workplaces fix dangerous equipment. By how often I wake up feeling grounded instead of anxious. I also give myself permission to enjoy life. I take spontaneous walks. I try new recipes. I sit in cafes with a book just because I can. These simple pleasures feel revolutionary after years of survival mode. If there's one thing I want people to understand about healing, it's this. You don't need permission to move on. You don't need closure from those who harmed you. And you don't need to carry loyalty to people who treated your life as disposable. Your peace matters more than their comfort. I didn't get the family I deserved, but I built the life I needed. And sometimes that's enough. So, if you're listening to this and waiting for someone to finally acknowledge your pain, please hear me. You don't have to wait. You can choose yourself now. Victory doesn't feel the way I imagined it would. It isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or dramatic music swelling in the background. There was no single moment when I raised my arms and thought, I made it. Victory came quietly, disguised as ordinary life. It showed up the first morning I woke up without fear sitting in my chest. It showed up the first time I walked through Eleanor's house and realized the building no longer held painful memories. It held laughter, shared meals, and soft conversations in the evenings. For a long time, I thought victory would look like my sister going to prison. I thought it would look like my father standing in front of a judge. And yes, accountability mattered. Justice mattered. Those moments closed doors that needed to be closed. But that wasn't victory. Victory was learning how to breathe again. Victory was choosing peace over bitterness. Victory was rebuilding a life that didn't revolve around trauma. I see it now in the smallest details. In the way Ruth hums while she folds laundry. In the way Margaret insists on watering the garden even when her knees ache. In the way new residents arrive guarded and slowly begin to soften, their shoulders dropping as they realize no one here is going to hurt them. That's victory. Mr. Harris still comes over every Sunday evening. Sometimes we cook together, sometimes we order takeout and sit on the porch watching the sky change colors. We don't talk about the past much anymore. We talk about books, about neighborhood gossip, about which plants survived the heat wave. Normal things. Those conversations remind me how far I've come. I used to measure success in milestones, degrees earned, promotions achieved, money saved. Now I measure it in moments of calm. In mornings when I drink coffee by the window. In evenings when I lock up Eleanor's house and feel proud instead of exhausted. In nights when I sleep through without nightmares. People still ask if I regret not trying to repair things with my family. I tell them the truth. I don't regret choosing safety. I don't regret protecting my peace. I don't regret walking away from people who showed me very clearly who they were. Regret lives in the past. I live in the present. My therapist once asked me what I thought real strength looked like now. I thought about it for a while. Then I said, consistency. Strength is showing up for yourself when no one is watching. Strength is honoring your boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable. Strength is letting joy back in after trauma tries to convince you it's unsafe. I didn't become strong because of what happened to me. I became strong because of what I chose afterward. I chose to transform Grandma Eleanor's house into a shelter instead of selling it. I chose to help prevent workplace injuries instead of letting my own become my identity. I chose to build community instead of isolating myself. And I chose to believe that my life still had meaning beyond survival. One afternoon, a former resident stopped by Eleanor's house with flowers. She had found a small apartment and a part-time job. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "You gave me my life back." Endvil. I shook my head. "No," I told her gently. "You did that. That's another thing I've learned. You can offer safety. You can offer support. But everyone saves themselves. I still have hard days. Some mornings my body reminds me of everything it endured. Some nights memories surface unexpectedly. Healing isn't perfect. It isn't permanent. But it is possible, and that matters. I also learned that chosen family doesn't require history. It requires presence. It requires respect. It requires care that doesn't come with conditions. My chosen family includes Mr. Harris, the women at Eleanor's house, colleagues who believe in my work, and friends who accept me exactly as I am. They don't ask me to explain my boundaries. They honor them. That's love. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who sat in that wheelchair at the top of the hill, listening to her sister say, "Everything is mine now." That woman didn't know if she would survive the next minute. She didn't know she would one day walk again. She didn't know she would turn betrayal into shelter or pain into purpose. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her this: you are stronger than you think. You are worth protecting. And your story doesn't end here. So if you're listening and you're still in the middle of your storm, please hear me. You don't have to see the whole path. You just have to take the next step. Victory isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life. And that is the quiet triumph no one can take away from you. This story isn't really about revenge. It's about awakening. It's about what happens when someone who has been silenced for years finally chooses to stand up for herself. It's about the painful truth that sometimes the people who share our blood are the ones who hurt us the most, and the quiet miracle of discovering that family can also be chosen. Amber's journey shows us something powerful. Survival isn't the end of the story. Healing is. Purpose is. And rebuilding your life on your own terms is the greatest victory of all. If any part of this story touched you, if you've ever felt invisible, betrayed, or forced to start over, please remember this. Your pain is real, your strength matters, and you deserve peace. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you found meaning in this story, I invite you to subscribe to Revenge Tale Society so you don't miss future stories about resilience, justice, and human courage. And if you feel comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, take care of yourself and never forget your worth.